Good morning, everyone. Uh, We anticipate this to be a lively discussion based upon the film. Assuming most of you have seen it, please feel free to enter any questions, comments that you have in the Q&A section. We'll monitor those and try to get to as many questions as we can. But to begin with, I'd like to introduce James Parker, the filmmaker. First, by saying to all three principals, congratulations on making the film. We were just absolutely delighted and impressed by the quality of the work and the message that you are conveying. So, James, what we'd like to do is begin with a brief set of comments from each of the three principals, and let's start with you. And I'd like to ask you to tell us what the film is about from your point of view. You know, why did you choose to tell this story, and what impact do you hope it has?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Good morning, everyone. I'm James Parker, director, co-producer of the film Other Side of the Hill. My production company, Synchronous Picture, is actually based here in San Diego with our offices down in South Park. So it's really wonderful to be connecting with a local organization. Our short 30-minute doc, Other Side of the Hill, explores the impacts of changing landscapes on rural Eastern Oregon and seeks to highlight some of the ways that communities are adapting and thriving. So our intention with the film was really to address and speak directly to the rigid definitions that are often used to describe rural communities, especially around climate issues, and help to start to build some bridges between rural and urban audiences, as exemplified by what we're doing this morning. So the experience of making this film has been deeply transformative for me in that it's helped me to break through many barriers of perceived difference, and it's also given me a deep-rooted respect for land stewards who live in communities like Lakeview, Oregon, that are oftentimes at the base of our natural resources. So we see a lot of posturing and disparaging language in state and federal politics, but when you get on the ground and you see all the incredible work that's happening in these communities, and you see the passion for protecting environment, and also frankly the ease at which we can come together and find common ground, I can't help but feel really hopeful and inspired by that. And so that's really, I think that speaks to the intention with the film and what we hope to accomplish with the screening tour behind the film. It's to sort of empower us all to break through those divides, to establish new connections and relationships with folks that might be outside of our normal bubbles, who might have some different viewpoints and different perspectives on things, but come to the table and work to find solutions. And I think now, especially more than ever, in light of the IPCC report that's just come out, and we have all this sort of dire news and these really urgent calls to action, I think that these types of discussions are so important. I think that we have, speaking as kind of an urbanite myself, we have so much to learn from a rural perspective, and the perspectives of Nick and Jim, and the story of how they bring differing viewpoints together, how they can, in a very contentious sort of context around logging and forestry, how they were able to come together and to bring environmental interest together with industry and find a path forward that works, how they were able to bring renewable energy in a big way to a community like Lakeview. There's just so much to learn. So that's what we hope to accomplish with the film. That's what we hope to accomplish here today. And just really grateful that you all are taking the time to engage in the discussion and to watch the film. And so thankful to Nick and Jim for giving us some of their time this morning too.
Well, thank you, James. Wonderful introduction, and very insightful of you to pick this topic. Jim, let's turn to you if we might. The film, as everyone probably knows by now, features Lake County Resources Initiative, which It seems like you founded Jim. How did you get there from your past? How did you get, where did you come to the idea of founding the LCRI? And what does the film and telling the story mean to you? What would you like us to understand?
Thank you. It is a long story. I was working for NRCS in the Resource Conservation Development Program in Washington, and I was working with University of Washington and Weyerhaeuser on trying to find common ground up there. And I met Martin Goebel from Sustainable Northwest, and he said, "How would you like to go home?" Basically, I worked a lot of ranches when I was a kid and from Lake County, and graduated just out of Lake County a little ways in Bonanza. And I go, boy, I got 3 years before I can retire from government. So Martin Goebel made arrangements with Senator Wyden that Sustainable Northwest would pay my salary until I could retire and I could come and start LCRI to get into the middle. The last remaining sawmill was here. The community, the commissioners, Sustainable Northwest wanted to find common ground and asked if I'd create an organization to help find that ground and save that mill and bring many of the environmental groups, Wilderness Society, Defenders of Wildlife, Nature Conservancy, etc., together. And came back to do it. As we were working on wood, we go, wait, what are we going to do with all this small diameter and stuff? And so we start thinking about biomass, and we got geothermal here. Then we start thinking, wow, we've got quite the renewable energy resources. So it just grew. That's how it started.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Nick, in the bio you sent us, you said that you came to this project in part through the Rare Americorps effort. I don't know about that, what that is. Perhaps you could tell us about that, and then tell us what this film is about for you.
Yeah, so thanks for having us here today, and thanks for this opportunity to get in front of this group and speak and have some great conversation. But to answer your question, so the Americorps program that brought me down to Lakeview, it's called the Rare Americorps program, or the Resource Assistance for Rural Environments Americorps program, and it's hosted through the University of Oregon. And what that program does is take graduate level individuals, people who either, gone and got their bachelor's degree or have moved through their master's program of some sorts, and places them in rural communities throughout Oregon. So generally they have between 25 and 35 placements in rural communities across the state. And the goal of that program is to just add capacity to rural communities where it's needed. And I decided to move into that program after working a couple years in the wood products industry as an engineer, a wood products engineer. And I was ready for a career change. So that's kind of how I ended up at LCRI. And I didn't really know what I was getting into. And it was all for the best, of course. But obviously, I mean, I'm still here. So it was great to learn what was going on down here. And it's been a great shift for me. And when we were originally approached about this film and asked if we wanted to participate in this, I didn't quite know what to think. It was new, it was different. And of course, not of course, but to be completely honest, being approached by somebody and saying like, look, we're going to bring a director up out of San Diego and he's going to follow you around with a video camera and show people what you do. There was a little bit of suspicion involved. So, but after meeting James and Juliet and all the other team, it was easy to tell right away that they came into this from a perspective of learning and really wanting to understand what we were doing. So it's been an awesome experience, in the conversations that it's prompted, and the groups that we've been able to speak with since the release of this film has really offered us some great opportunities to have these conversations about what we're doing, and really discuss the need for urban and rural communities to work together to have a meaningful impact on mitigating climate change and adapting to the impacts of climate change.
Fantastic. One quick small follow-up on that. There's discussion of a climate conservation corps as part of the programs coming out of Washington for the climate mitigation efforts. Do you have any thoughts about the Climate Conservation Corps? Do you think that's a good idea? Should we pursue that or not? Or
To be completely honest, I'm not very familiar with that, and I don't know a lot of the details. Still too early to speak on it, but I mean, it sounds like a needed effort.
fantastic. Thank you. Carl, do you want to jump in with some questions? We'd alternate here.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. And we'll keep watching the chat. So folks, as you hear us talking and you're inspired to think of new question that you want us to ask, please place them in there. I want to start with the fact that I think the intergenerational dynamic of Jim and Nick is a really powerful one. We've got someone who's Jim, I think you described in the film that you're 70. And I'm not sure Nick's age, but I can guess that it's appreciably younger. And I think one of the less prominent arguments in the climate movement is one about intergenerational justice, and how earlier generations are destined to have destined the younger generations to have to clean up this mess. And you alluded to it in the film, Jim. You're very aware, and you don't want to be that person that didn't do the work. So I very much appreciate you saying that. But can you guys talk about whether you've had those discussions amongst each other, like that you're coming from two different generations, and does that impact the work that you're doing? Do you learn from each other about from the different generations' point of view? And then also I want to follow it up after you're done. James, did you consider that when you were trying to put this film together? Was that an important aspect to you?
I'll start out. Nick and I really haven't had those type of discussions. Now, we also have a forest monitoring, science monitoring team led by local science teachers. So we've got high school to college students on that team. So there's a lot of generational change within LCRI down. And I've never really discussed it. I am pleased with the younger generation of Nick because he's doing a better job than I did. And I really, you can't believe how gratifying it is to see somebody step in and take it beyond where you dreamt. So, yeah.
Those are kind words, James, but we really haven't, Jim and I don't think we have sat down and had those conversations about the generational differences in the work that we're doing. Jim and I are on the same page about a lot of things, and Jim has been a mentor to me, and I still continue to learn from him and his perspectives. He has a lot more wisdom and insight that I just simply don't have because I am a fair amount younger. But, the issue that we're facing, I don't think it's really productive to like put blame on the older generation, for the things that they did, necessarily. And a lot of the things that we're trying to get done, really it spans generational ideologies and generational perspectives. It doesn't matter. This could have been just as effective 100 years ago as it's going to be 100 years from now, finding solutions where economics, ecology, and social benefit can all exist. That's something that's here to stay. It doesn't matter when it's going to happen. It's always going to be relevant.
Yeah, well, my grandkids can't use a rotary, don't know what a rotary dial phone is, so we grow as we grow in age. So, yeah,
I have to admit, Jim, I don't really know what one is either. We as observers coming in, to film, we had a very different perspective. We were very aware of the generational dynamics and how critical that is, for the continuation of the work that Jim did and many other folks did in Lakeview specifically, at the time of the sort of the timber wars and having to reinvent, a local economy because of a mill shutting down and shifting forest policies and things like that. And so there was this, amazing work that was done where common ground was found, where Lakeview was able to get to a place where it was net zero in its emissions. I mean, incredible stuff. But, if that all stops as Jim retires, then perhaps it's all for naught, especially as we start to move into these really critical years. So the fact that Jim and Nick we're able to, the torch has been passed and it's been done so effectively. And now Nick is building upon what Jim has done in such an amazing way, and finding all these new pathways to expand the work. I think it's, Carl, it's a central piece of this film, and it's a central takeaway of the film, and something I think we all need to be thinking about, no matter what our organizations are doing, or no matter what stage in life we're at. It's a really critical thing. And the other thing that's really interesting in the context of rural Eastern Oregon, which applied to Lakeview as well as the other communities in the film, Wallowa County and Sherman County, there's kind of a lot of young folks choose to leave rural places and sometimes come back, and oftentimes don't. And so, encouraging young people to stay and live and work in rural places is really critical. And the importance of rural communities for all of us can't be understated. Like, rural communities are shepherds of our natural resources. Oftentimes the industries that are in rural communities are fueling cities and all the work that folks do in cities, not just literally the power that we consume, but enabling us to have jobs in technology and creative arts and things like that. If there weren't folks who were managing forest and producing timber and producing energy, and doing all that in a way that's responsible, it would affect all of us really acutely. So intergenerational dynamics in rural communities, especially at the intersection of climate, is really important.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's pick up on another tension pointed to in the film so beautifully. This is a question from Merrill. Maybe Jim, you could start with the answer, or your first thoughts. Merrill says, over the years, I've had many heated conversations with a next door neighbor who was on the other side of the fence, literally, politically, and as a climate skeptic. I've tried various strategies in hope of changing his views, from economic to love of grandchildren, all to no avail. Should I continue or just give up and move on?
I know my own personality is I don't give up. I think my wife describes my facilitation abilities pretty good, in that I try and listen to everybody's point of view, and we try to, we don't always succeed, but we try to calmly discuss our differences and discuss all the alternatives. And sometimes that takes a long time to get to an agreement. It's not you just can't convince somebody in a few minutes that's set in a certain way. And I can say that's true for climate change, it's true for forestry, it's true for people that don't get the COVID shot. It's a time-consuming thing that you've got to be willing to put the time in.
So you're not pessimistic, you're optimistic, but be persistent.
Yeah, and that's very good, Joe. Yeah, I'm an optimist. Yes, I am.
So I had an observation from the film, and I'll ask this question. If you guys can't answer it, it's understandable, because there's a lot covered in the film. And this may have been something that would be more of an answer that someone else that was in the film could have given. But I noticed that when we saw the wind turbines in the open space, they were, I think, in what was originally a farm space. And now it is wind turbines owned by, I believe, an outside developer, but it's bringing in tax money and it's powering the community, it's powering beyond the community. Those are great things. And I wondered whether there's still an opportunity to continue to farm in that space, and whether that's a dynamic that y'all are researching there and trying to understand whether the ranch lands and the farmlands can be cross-compatible with some of the renewable energies, as opposed to giving one up for the other. And the reason why I ask is we've got a fair amount of ranch land here in San Diego, and certainly a fair amount of farmland in San Diego, and it's undergoing transformation. Some of those ranches are being sold off because it's difficult. Some of us have different perceptions about the future of beef and ranching, but we want to also support those folks that have been doing that their whole lives and come up with strategies that help move them into another stage in the fight against climate change. So Jim or Nick, do you guys touch on that at all in the work that you do as far as mixing the use of wind with farm and with ranching?
You want to start first, Jim, and I'll follow up?
Or vice versa.
Okay. All right, yeah, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
So when it comes to what's going on up in Sherman County with those wind projects, they are keeping those agricultural, fields open to production. And that's a little bit different story than we have going on down here in Lake County. We're not the ideal location for wind energy. What we're really looking at here is solar. And that's, it's kind of a different kind of project where it's not as easy to have those dual use kind of results with the development of these projects, but really land use is one of our top issues right now. In LCRI, we've never supported or really wanted to see irrigated ag land converted into solar projects. We view land, and particularly irrigated high value ag land, as our most valuable resource. Agriculture really drives our economy, and there's so many better places in Lake County to build solar projects that's not going to have the conflict or take agricultural land out of production or affect water rights or affect high value soil. Here for Lake County, just promoting projects on irrigated ag land just really doesn't make sense. We understand that isn't the case, in a lot of other places. There's a real need for land, and they're very limited where you can build, commercial scale projects in a lot of other areas. And something that's come out of, the promotion of this film and conversations that we had is robust discussion around the opportunity to host renewable energy projects in a county like Lake County for an urban area where we have so much land that, really can't be used for anything else. And a lot of times if you're in the same utility territory, you can do that. So for example, a lot of Portland is served by Pacific Power. We're having conversations with groups up there where we're saying, let's look at hosting a project down here in Lake County for your neighborhood or for your smaller community, because they just don't have the land to do it. And you're avoiding those conflicts with agricultural production or wildlife habitat or other issues. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. But Jim, maybe you have some perspectives.
Excuse me, are they open to in Portland to you're providing power for them?
Yeah, I mean, people are interested in doing that. On a neighborhood level, on a community level up there, because what they don't have is the land. They don't have the land to develop a 1, 2, 3 megawatt project up there. When they could look down here in Lake County, and we could talk about hosting one, because we have thousands of acres that really can't be used for anything else. It's not conducive wildlife habitat. It's not, high value land. It's just alkaline sage ground that's just sitting there, not using anything. Or even better than that, looking at like what are called brownfield sites or sites, old lumber mill sites, old dump sites where the land really can't be used for anything else. Those are ideal places to host renewable energy production facilities.
And I'd add too, and it's not like we don't have conflict. I'm on the Lake County Planning Commission. We got a 50 megawatt solar project that has got a lot of opposition right now. And, because it does take up land, and sometimes it takes up some grazing ground, and then people complain about being next door, and does it lose property value? It's not an easy thing ever to do any of this. And I think we're getting pretty full. Nick and I've talked about this, of solar our original intent was biomass and geothermal, because we've got a lot of geothermal and we've got thinnings to get these fires down. And so we could do other energy forms too. And that was our original plan. And solar, because we're the best solar county in the state, really caught on here. But I don't want to give the impression that it's ever easy. Just in our society, we all have our own opinions and our rights to our own opinions. And that comes out strong.
That's a really good point, Jim. And that, brings up the topic of, if that's something that a community like, one of your guys' community wants to have a conversation like that with a rural community, approaching that community in the right way, and listening to what they have to say is really important. With this project that's been looking at being developed here in Lake County, there's so much pushback because the community of Lakeview feels like it's being, walked on. They don't feel like the developer is trying to work with the community and take the community values into account. And that's another part of the equation that, where a lot of the contention, a lot of the issues arise. But it is of utmost importance to keep community values and community benefit in mind when, developing these kind of partnerships and relationships.
So I have a question here. In the wake of the IPCC report, it's hard not to feel urgent doom and gloom. This film feels much more hopeful and solutions focused. And so in your work at LCRI, how did you find a balance between urgency and showing that there is hope for change? And James, is that something that you thought about as a filmmaker as well?
Well, and I'll say our emphasis in what we started out with renewable energy was because we were working on the forestry sector. And all of a sudden I looked at all the small diameter and slash piles and why are we burning these? So we started working on biomass. And that got us thinking about geothermal. We go, well, we got that resource. We approached it. My initial approach was from an economic development standpoint, that it would bring in new taxes. And I'm like any other landowner. I don't like new taxes, So if I could find more business and more put on, that made sense. And it made sense to the community, or to the leaders in the community. That was our original move. I don't want to say, oh, I had all this climate change and all the saving the world in mind. That was not it. It was an economic development strategy, and it moved on and forward. And I wish the rest of the country would pick up what we've done since we started, because without any new laws or any new taxes, we could go a long ways right now towards solving climate change, but not all the way, but we could make a lot of progress.
Yeah, I really appreciate Jim's consistency on kind of communicating the low-hanging fruit. And there's so much opportunity that we can just take advantage of right now. And irrespective of politics, whether a community is, red or blue. From the film perspective, we were definitely aware of, we had a sense of urgency, but I think it was around the breakdown in the legislature. And we started making this film, I think about 1.5 years ago now. And at the time in Oregon, there was pretty much this complete breakdown of communication between Democrats and Republicans around climate legislation. There was a bill called HB 2020, and it sort of culminated in this Republican walkout. And folks fled the state, and it was really dramatic. But what it represented was just that there was zero communication happening, and there were these really rigid definitions of each other. Where one side is just, they're crazy tree hugging environmentalists and they don't know anything about economics or business. And the other side are crazy industrialists and, rural folks who don't know anything about environment or don't care about environment. And so that was like the spark that started this film project. And there was a group of folks, all executive producers of the film, who were from different parts of Oregon, mostly western side of Oregon, but representing different political ideologies, and all sort of came together and we're like, we got to do something about this. And I think that speaks to this sense of urgency. In the face of this dire situation, we don't have time to be walking out and just having communication completely break down. And so that's why we just kind of hit the road and started, myself and Juliet, who was a co-producer, just started going to Eastern Oregon communities. Really didn't know many folks or have many connections, and just started asking questions and listening and trying to understand. And as you see in the film, we discovered these incredible stories, and so many people who really have a deep connection with environment and very strong desire to preserve and protect the environment, and so there's just so much common ground. There's so much opportunity for us to come together and to do so much more than we're doing right now. And I think it's just, oftentimes it's kind of an easy excuse that, we're just so different, and it's easier to just not engage in that discussion. But as Jim mentioned earlier, we have to just be willing to put in that time and that effort to break through some of those initial roadblocks, and just stay at the table long enough to be reminded that we have more in common than we do in difference. That at the end of the day, we all really do want the same things. We want healthy environment. We want, a healthy place for our family and our friends. There's so much that we have in common. And so, I'm so grateful to Jim and to Nick, because they continue to just, kind of beat this drum. And they're even just this morning, when we zoom out and we kind of look at this, Nick and Jim are tuning in from Lakeview, very remote, very rural, also one of the most, conservative parts of Oregon. And we're here having this discussion with, climate change organization in San Diego. It's just incredible. And we're finding this common ground. We're finding this space to, to sort of inspire each other and to learn from each other. So we can do so much more of this,
What were the specifics of the 2020 bill, and how did that get resolved, or has it been resolved? And did the film play a role in this in any way? Or Nick and Jim, did you play a role in it?
Yeah, so 2020, and I just want to double check here. I'm having a bad connection. Can you guys still hear me okay, or would
We hear you,
it be
Nick.
better for me to take my video? Okay.
No, we hear you, Nick.
Okay. 2020 was a cap and trade bill, carbon cap and trade. So there was a lot of opposition to that, on the right side of the political spectrum, simply because of its potential impacts to rural and low income folks, as well as industry. So there was a walkout there. But this year, Oregon passed House Bill 2021, which puts Oregon in line to be the most progressive in terms of sourcing new energy production from renewable sources. I want to say it's like 80% or 90% by 2040. And it's the most progressive and kind of forward-thinking bill. Is House Bill 2021. And a big part that we're really, really excited about with House Bill 2021 is that there's going to be $50 million available for community renewable energy projects from the state. So that money is going to be distributed out to rural communities, really in any community across the state. So organizations like LCRI and communities like Lakeview can try to tap into that funding to build, a project that feeds them energy directly or provides a battery backup system for vulnerable community members and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity associated with that, and it's pretty exciting.
Here's a question for you, Nick. I'm an organizer with Sierra Club, and I work with people up and down the state. And I find that having that, it is very useful to be coordinating with others on campaigns, understanding where they're having successes and not. Are you finding it similar in the work that you do as as an ED for what I assume is a very small organization. Do you have folks that you work in coalition with, and maybe recommendations you would have for other folks working in rural communities about how to get tapped in?
So that's one of the great opportunities that the last film, Other Side of the Hill, really afforded LCRI, is it put our name out there as somebody who's doing progressive energy work in a rural community. And that's something that's seriously been lacking on a state policy development level in Oregon. You know, a lot of decisions and a lot of policy has been built around how it affects, urban Portland, urban Oregon and Salem. So we had organizing groups actually reaching out to LCRI saying, hey, what's your 2 cents on this? What's your 2 cents on this policy and how would it affect rural Oregonians? And that's a fine line that we need to be careful about how we tread as well, because we can speak for Lake County, we can speak for our community, but we cannot be looked to as a spokesperson for all of rural Eastern Oregon. But it has given us the opportunity to work with other organizations that we know within our network that are serving rural Oregon and say, hey, here's how you get involved. Hey, what are you, share your 2 cents on this. Let's use this as an opportunity for rural communities and underrepresented communities in Eastern Oregon to get together and have our voice heard when it comes to drafting policy. So it's been a great opportunity. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, it does. You're clearly you're working with others. Sometimes you're working with new folks that you hadn't worked with before, and I think that's all part of the larger movement of how do we progress. So great.
Along the same line, but slight variation of question. This is another from Merrill. It's largely being fueled by activists at the grassroots level. Many municipalities around California are making the transition from the independent operator utility, the IOU energy model, PG&E in California being a good example, and by the way, responsible apparently for many of our major fires due to poor maintenance. Anyway, the transition from IOU energy model to community choice aggregation of power. One of the most significant impediments to a rapid and equitable changeover is fierce resistance from the California Public Utilities Commission, working in concert with the for-profit utilities. Based on your successes, what areas of advocacy would you recommend?
I'm going to start, and this is just a conversation. I'm not against the IOUs. I don't believe community renewables can provide all our energy needs. In fact, but I'm willing to discuss that. But they can provide some benefits, like we're looking at a community solar project for our schools and our hospital. But to provide all our energy needs in a rural area, it'd be easier for us probably than a metropolitan area. But I think we need them, and poor maintenance is some of the cause of those fires that you talked about, and we need to address that. So I'm not anti-IOU at all. I just put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jim. We rely on them pretty heavily. But I think that there's a big opportunity to hold investor-owned utilities accountable for how they're sourcing their energy and how they're maintaining their infrastructure and transmission systems. And I think that was one of the major drivers around House Bill 2021. And there was a lot of coordination and a lot of conversation that happened with these investor-owned utilities in Oregon. So it was a really, really collaboratively developed bill that had input from a very, very diverse group of stakeholders. And really, I believe the leading organizations did their best not to leave anybody out in those conversations, even if those conversations were going to be difficult to have.
And Nick's doing a great job. He's working with Energy Trust, which has funding from IOUs. And what he's doing is putting renewables, solar and others on businesses and homes. So we can work together. That's why I don't want IOUs to be an enemy. We do need to find ways to work together, like we worked with the timber industry in the environmental community, So that's the concept that I I believe it.
And I agree with you, Jim. And a big part of the work that we do within our community around energy is promoting energy efficiency on a business by business and home by home basis. And you know, that's not necessarily something that people get excited about, but that's the first step when it comes to looking at developing small scale renewable energy projects. Is your home efficient? Is your business efficient? Or do you have insulation? Do you have LED lights? Do you have efficient HVAC equipment? And that is the foundation, you know, of an efficient energy system. And in my opinion, that's where we need to be focusing our effort, is on energy efficiency. You know, there's some statistics out there on Oregon Department of Energy's website that, I mean, some absurd amount of energy that's generated in this state is wasted. And I want to say it's like, you know, at least 30 or 40% of all the energy that's generated in this state is wasted. And that is crazy to me. And it just kind of demonstrates the need for using the energy that's already being generated more efficiently. We already have what we need. We just need to focus on using it efficiently. And it's that stuff that's not very exciting, like, you know, insulation and double pane windows, that needs to get involved, you know, be part of the conversation. And then, you know, the other part of that is, how do we reduce those financial barriers to provide those energy efficiency options to folks that can't afford that stuff out of pocket? That's a whole nother conversation in itself. But I just wanted to harp on that a little bit, because energy efficiency is left out of the conversation a lot.
I appreciate that, Nick. And I think we saw in the film that Lakeview's on the rebound. You know, like they're not a rich community necessarily. And so those discussions about, like, how does someone invest in their home, that's always a tough discussion. And the thought that Superman's coming with, you know, financial resources to do that is foolish. Like, we have to come up with good strategies. So appreciate that. Marion asked a question of James. Can you tell us a little bit about other film projects that you've worked on, or you're working on, or other things that you're doing also surrounding the environment or climate or anything like that?
Sure. So with our nonprofit work, we do a lot of work with the North American Association for Environmental Education. And so we're helping to amplify some of their work, which empowers environmental educators all over North America. We also do a lot of work with Underwriters Laboratories. And they have a wonderful grant program called the UL Innovative Education Award, where they really focus on empowering, you know, grassroots organizations that are innovating in STEM education, with a lot of emphasis on environmental education. So that's really exciting work we're doing. Something that is really relevant to our discussion today is that we're actually in production on a follow-up film with Nick and Jim. This time it's going to be a feature-length documentary, and we're going to dive much deeper into the story of the Lake County Stewardship group, and that was the group that was formed, you know, as the lumber mills were shutting down in Lakeview. There was this sort of drastic situation where the economy was in dire straits, and there needed to be some sort of reinvention. And Jim and a lot of other folks came together, brought environmental interests to the table, brought industry interests to the table, government, and they found a way to move forward and to reinvent Lakeview. And so it's just an incredible story of collaboration. There's so much to glean from it. I think so many lessons and wisdom to take from that moment and that time and apply them to this moment right now. And then also, of course, going much deeper with Nick and his story, kind of taking over LCRI, building upon this foundation that Jim laid, and you know, where he wants to take it, and also the exploring this moment where Lakeview is facing a lot of climate related challenges, you know, with wildfire, with drought, with a lot of controversy around forest management, renewables, some of the controversy around renewables now as it sort of matures in Lakeview. And we talk about ag land, and is is it justified or right to just put solar panels anywhere and everywhere? So that's really exciting. That's something that's in production right now. We don't have a clear timeline on that, but probably will be releasing sometime within the next year or so.
Fantastic. Just following up briefly, what is the planned distribution for this film?
For the new film?
No, the existing one. Where can people go to see it?
Sure. So this film has been really exciting. Other Side of the Hill. We had multiple screenings on CBS. We were nominated for an Emmy. We have the film has gone on this wonderful screening tour that's been run by Ellis Wadamanuk, he's just an incredible impact producer who's worked on some amazing films, films way bigger than Other Side of the Hill. So we're really, really grateful for his expertise in kind of crafting this tour. But the screening tour has been going on for a few months now, and we're going to continue it on through the end of this year. So there's opportunity to host many more screenings like this, to encourage other organizations to screen the film, to host Q&As. We're hoping to get into a few academic institutions here as the new semester kicks off. And the film is also now available for streaming through Vimeo on demand. So anyone can go and stream the film, and we're really excited about that. So.
Great. This next question is a tough one and a loaded one. I don't expect a good answer from you guys, but maybe it plants a seed of something we should all be thinking about. Skip asked, what sort of depreciation calculation is used to maintain and replace those resources as they deteriorate? And so I think he's talking about maybe the wind and the solar. You guys have that conversation early on with folks about, like, this is the beginning, but we also have to plan for how we will maintain these and build them out, and not be in a situation where somewhere down the road folks are regretting, okay, we didn't have a plan for what's the next step with our renewables.
Well, on the planning commission, I will admit, when we first started this, we did not think about those things. But remember, we were looking at biomass and geothermal, and solar came out on top. But anyway, we're going, whoa. So now we're having decommissioning plans with the companies that we're reviewing. I'm not sure we're right on target yet, because we're growing. It's like anything in life. You start out and you start to learn more and more, and you grow. And we're growing in our knowledge and adapting. But we're trying. We're working on that. We realize that.
So the lifetime, and I don't know if this is even answering the question right on, but the lifetime of these commercial scale projects or utility scale projects is usually like in the 30 to 32 year range. But these projects amortize over an increased amortization schedule. It's called accelerated depreciation. And the developers of these projects, large scale projects or even rooftop projects for commercial businesses or homeowners, they benefit from accelerated depreciation. So they're depreciating these projects over 5 years. And that's actually one of the federal financial benefits that is driving renewable energy projects and driving the renewable energy. And another federal benefit is the investment tax credit, which is still at 26% right now. So there's 26% of project costs go to offsetting your federal tax liability dollar for dollar. So when you're stacking an investment tax credit at 26% with accelerated depreciation over 5 years, those are two major subsidies in the renewable energy industry that are really driving the industry. And those apply, again, to both utility scale projects and small scale projects. Sorry to get in the weeds there, but I hope that provides some.
No, that's great. And I'm glad you guys are being thoughtful about that. Jim, I think you in particular, pointed to the fact that this is an evolution, and no one should feel timid about charging forward with some of these great solutions. But as we evolve and learn more about, what's on the back end, so how will we decommission? And I'm assuming that if we put solar panels up there the first time, we'll probably replace them with solar panels the second time. It's not likely that we'll have to just have a plan B where we don't use solar in the future when the first batch needs replacement. So appreciate that.
There are, I will say, I've had some arguments by some very intelligent people said in 34 plus years, we're going to have other technology. And I go, you may be right. I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah. And we've also worked with a person that's been in solar industry for a very long time who points out those are sort of the beginning of end of life in some ways. Like, so many of these panels will probably live on way beyond what their expected lifetime was, because it doesn't make sense to pull them off a roof if they're still producing. So, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And I think that's a big part of the technology right now, is they're focusing on trying to make sure that they have less degradation than prior panels, which is important too.
In a different theme, you mentioned that you're doing some biophysical monitoring. Could you tell us about that monitoring and how it might relate to tracking environmental changes, drought, forest fires, and so forth?
Yeah, so our biophysical monitoring crew is really our foundational crew at LCRI. And that's really why LCRI was formed, was to provide those biophysical monitoring services and host that crew, in addition to convening and facilitating a Lakeview Stewardship Group Forest Collaborative. And what that crew does is collects data on the impacts of the restoration projects and the management plans that the collaborative put forth. So they're out there every summer. They're actually on staff and active right now, collecting data on soil health, canopy cover, species composition and richness. They're collecting water information. It's a robust monitoring system, and we have one of the most extensive forest health data sets in the nation when it comes to that kind of stuff. And we actually just had a report put out outlining our monitoring over the last 8 or 9 years. And that's housed at the Ecosystem Workforce Program website for the University of Oregon. And I wish I had an easier link for that. But if anybody is interested in reading more about the biophysical monitoring program and what kind of data is being collected, I can make my email address available and I can get that report to you. It's very, very thorough. And we brought a data analyst on for a couple of years to actually produce that in conjunction with a large team of folks.
Small bias, but James, that might be a delightful segment in your next movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd like to say that was the monitoring team was a buy-in by both industry and the environmental community that to get us to make decisions, to help us make decisions that were environmentally correct and economically correct, that we could have an industry, but we had to do those things and monitor progress. And on both sides of the fence, on the environmental side, sometimes decisions are made out of fear of what will happen. And having science, you can't believe some of the discussions I've had with people in the wilderness side, defenders of wildlife, that go, wow, maybe we need to think about that now. That's against what they normally believe, and so I think it's key to have that kind of data going, to help everybody come to the table and come to consensus. Like the lady over the fence talking to her neighbor, it's having monitoring and data and discussions over that data and what it means and what new data do we need to go check. An example was the monitoring team came up and said there are some stands out there that got these large pines way over 21 inches and nothing's growing around it. And we're measuring that they may be too many of them and they're taking up all the moisture and so we don't have new trees come up and all the nutrients. So maybe we need to thin some of those stands. So the collaborative with the environmental groups said, wow, okay, let's do a master's degree study on that. And actually, and Nick was part of that, did that, help do that study and have that done. And that's what monitoring does for you, is bring up those questions and then you try to answer them. And it's amazing, I think. And it helps come to those agreements that you're commenting about. I'll also say on the collaborative side, there's very definite risk with this. And that's how I met my wife. So, you know.
Yeah, just to build off what Jim is saying, but a data-driven, objective approach that really informs the decision-making processes. That was one major tool that has been and is still being used to facilitate and prompt these conversations between differing ideologies. If everybody can get on the same page that data is objective and data doesn't lie, that's a major tool for building the foundation of these conversations in a really.
Just to exemplify the significance of this monitoring crew, we had the opportunity in this new film to go out and join Nick on a forest tour that LCRI facilitated, I think last month. And you had Forest Service folks, you had folks from the local timber mill, you had multiple environmental groups there, as well as the folks who are actually doing the field monitoring. And it was this space where all of these different interests went out into the forest together to a few different sites of significance, and the data was presented. And then there was this opportunity for all of these groups to have discussion out in the forest. And, they're discussing in real time, what will be the forest management practices in the future. And it was it was an amazing thing to see those discussions happening. And the role of the monitoring crew was so evident. They were sort of like almost like the UN, so this neutral body that was presenting this information that then was provided kind of this this common data that we could have discussions about and debate and figure out what we were going to do moving forward.
So shifting from silviculture to agriculture, Mayor's asked the question. She saw the expansive ranch and farmland in the film and wondered if sustainable agriculture practices are or will be part of your economic development discussion.
So the short answer to that question is yes. And I want to start this out by saying that agricultural producers, both ranchers and farmers in Lake County, they are dependent on the health of the landscape to maintain their livelihood. And they've known that forever. They've known that for generations and generations. And I think there's a lot of miscommunication there about how a lot of agricultural producers interact with the land. But it does just kind of beg the question: who has more incentive to promote a healthy landscape than those whose livelihood is directly dependent on it? But to move on from that a little bit, yes, agricultural producers, both farmers and ranchers, are continuing to learn here and take into account things like no-till drill and promoting soil health through various other means. And another effort that LCRI works on is assisting those agricultural producers in Lake County, and actually on a statewide level, with implementing renewable energy projects into their agricultural processes. So, a lot of ag producers, they're strapped for resources, they're strapped for time. So we offer assistance to them to improve their irrigation efficiency, to promote or increase the efficiency of the irrigation systems, as well as provide the resources and the assistance to develop renewable energy projects and get those into their processes, whether it be, off-grid water troughs for cattle, or putting up solar arrays to offset, water pumping for irrigation applications, or actually building systems that replace, diesel-powered pumps and generators. So there's a huge opportunity there in the agricultural side of things to work with ag producers, and they are taking that initiative upon themselves, but LCRI is also here to provide them the resources and the assistance where.
Yeah, and I'd like to put a personal note to that side. It was many years ago. I was a student in wildlife biology at Oregon State, and I was up in the mountains helping turn out cattle with my grandfather. And Forest Service were praising us. Well, I'd heard in Oregon State that, cattle trample riparian zones and do all that. So I turned to my grandfather and I go, here we're getting all these accolades, how we're running cows up here. And I go, why is that? And he says, that's because we're a horseback every day and moving them. You know, not the same group every day, but you know, we kept going. Now, does everybody do that? No, there are bad in any industry, there's bad and good players. But I think, like Nick said, most of the ag people I know really want to care for the land because that's their future and their kids' future. So they really do that. And I'll tell you also, when I'm a horseback looking at the ass of a cow, that's my church.
I thought we were scheduled to go till 11. We're past that now. How much do we want to go further? Merrill, do you have thoughts about that? Are we ready?
Well, I would take that question to our panelists. Do you guys have a few more minutes? Because there's some very provocative questions coming in.
Okay.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, good. Cool. Are any of the rural businesses or farms and ranches and so forth installing microgrids with battery backup and so forth so that they can separate from the grid if needed and continue operating?
Yes, there is an intense amount of interest in off-grid systems. I probably get 2, 3, 4 calls a week from irrigators or ranchers who are like, hey, help me design an off-grid system so I can, you know, water my cows or water my crops or whatever. And I have to be careful about the kind of assistance that I provide because I am not like a licensed solar contractor. So I can consult and give some level of assistance as well as kind of help raise funds for that. But, you know, there is a major push on the irrigation end to move away from the grid. Everybody wants to have battery backup. Everybody wants to promote and implement these off-grid projects. But a big barrier to that is people's understanding of these projects and really just information about how these projects are developed and what goes into developing these projects. A lot of people just think it's easy as, you know, just getting it done. But it's not. It's complicated, and a lot of things need to be taken into account when assessing the feasibility and the viability of these projects from an agricultural production side. There's a lot to it, but that said, there's just a ton of interest in it, and I just can continue to see it grow.
No, that's good. Very good, Nick. I'd also like to say we need as a group, we've done a few of these, and rural areas we could do a lot more for agriculture and for homeowners. And, you know, I got 13 acres, and that's ground source heat pumps that uses the earth's heat and cooling ability. I mean, the amount of energy we can save with these things, particularly if they're horizontal, not vertical, are very cost efficient and great paybacks. And we need to do more of that. It's hard to get everything done that we think we could get done. You know what I mean? It's wish we had more capacity to get everything done that could really get done out here to make a difference.
Teresa asked the question, are the irrigation strategies also aimed at saving water in view of severe drought? How are you guys dealing with drought there? And are folks changing their strategies about water use at all?
Yeah, that's a really nuanced question. There's a lot to that. But I guess I'll start out by saying you can promote irrigation efficiency programs and projects, and people will take advantage of those. People want to use the water that they do have more efficiently. It's their, you know, most valuable commodity right now. That said, though, when you look at water rights and how water rights work, particularly in Oregon, and the same thing in California, from what I understand about California water rights, is there's not really incentive to use less water. You either use it or you lose it. And if you don't use as much as you're allocated, then you're going to have a reduced amount of water available in future years. So for me, a big part of this is how water rights work. And as I understand it, it's a big issue in California with, you know, vineyards. A lot of people buy vineyards because you control the water rights. And if you own those water rights, you know, there's a big, I guess, financial benefit there. So I guess above and beyond that, I also wanted to hit on that when you talk about drought and you talk about water availability, it needs to be more inclusive of than just looking at those users. You need to look at water and resource use on a landscape level. And what I mean by that is what goes on in the woods in watersheds affects what's happening at the valley bottoms. You know, when you have forests that are so overgrown, they're consuming all those resources, with water being one of those primary resources. And there's a direct correlation between how thick and overstocked forests are on uplands with water availability and water table, you know, in valley bottoms. So when you talk about drought and you talk about water use, it needs to be from a landscape level. It can't be just from, you know, looking and blaming and pointing the finger at ag producers and saying, well, they're not using their water efficiently. You know, they could improve probably in some cases, and a lot of people understand that, but you also need to be looking at what's happening on the ridge tops and in the forests and in the top ends of these watersheds, because there's direct correlation there, and that cannot be.
This question, I think, is for Jim on biomass energy production. Are you still working on this? And it seems like part of our forestry management issues can benefit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm working as I'm retired, because that's with no pay. That's what I learned what retirement meant. But no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, Nick and I have had discussions about moving this. We've also talked to at least a couple of our county commissioners. There's a lot of opportunity for biomass energy, but also other biomass uses, such as cross-laminated timber I talked about, where we can build 14-story buildings out of small diameter wood that's built in a manner that, as Nick as a wood engineer could explain better, but you know, and it stores a lot of carbon. And the study done by Chad Oliver, who's the head of sustainable forestry at Yale, and Bruce Lipke, who's University of Washington, and Chad was at University of Washington then, shows those carbon savings over building those taller landscapes in an urban area out of wood. So there's a lot of different biomass that we can talk about. And I talked about fear. The fear why we cannot use biomass off of a federal forest for energy or any purpose. And it's a fear out of there was a biomass plant proposed down in the southern part of the United States that would have taken every tree. And that is a definite fear. But with monitoring and collaboration, we can design where we don't light those slash piles of fire and put more carbon dioxide into the air. We actually use them and store them and use the small diameter to reduce fuel loads and so we don't have these big fires with these huge clouds of carbon dioxide. Fire is considered natural event. I don't think today the fires we're seeing were ever natural. They're just too large and too consuming, create their own weather, on and on. We need to rethink our whole thought process, you know, around that. And biomass is one of those, and Senator Wyden's in tune with that. He did try to introduce a bill, but because of fears of what it could do. So we need to sit down with a group of all entities and design something that we can do this right and treat our federal forest right and private lands. And well, we use private lands for biomass and stuff, but we need to use, we're 75%, if I remember right, Nick, federal lands in Lake County. So, you know, we're not using that much land. Why, as good as it could be and as environmentally as good as it could be.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know a lot of folks have a very binary thought on trees. They're like, well, we just plant trees, we'll solve our way out of this. And then I have the counter notion of, if we put all our faith in trees and climate crisis stops those forests from staying healthy and burns them all, we're in trouble. So obviously we need a very nuanced decision making on how to manage forests and how to use those resources and how to keep things healthy. You know, it would be great if we could count on all forests that we want to rebound, but we've seen some societies try desperately to replant forests, and sometimes it doesn't work out the way people expect it to. So, you know, we want to do those efforts for sure, but we need to be honest with ourselves about the challenge that it requires.
Very true. And we can design replanting to make it ecologically effective too. Sometimes we've done replanting in the wrong ways and not got the results we want. Well, we know how to do it the right way.
Well, I appreciate your insights about what you call the triple bottom line of social, economic, and ecological benefits of a project. Have you figured out a way to use the triple bottom line to push back against fossil fuel use and to move toward more renewable energy use?
That's a good question, and it really, it really depends on who your audience is, and which one of those benefits you want to emphasize to your audience. For example, here in Lake County, locally, folks are more interested in the economics of switching to a renewable energy project, maybe not so much the environmental benefits in some cases. So, and then just the opposite too, if you're working with a different audience. So, I guess it's an indirect answer to your question, but yes, and it's tailoring the conversation to your audience, and kind of really trying to speak with.
And just like not putting blame, fossil fuels were discovered and we all used them. I still drive a diesel truck because there is an electric one that can haul a stock trailer, and we don't have charging stations out here yet. They design those two things, I'd be happy to switch, So we're progressing because things are progressing. And, anyway, I just go, fossil fuels were part of the early technology, now it's changing.
It's true.
Yeah, appreciate that, Jim. And also, I hope that we can dive into that dynamic of, Portland versus rural that was touched upon in the 30-minute documentary. I hope that we can see more of that, because obviously there are some challenges there, but I think there are also great opportunities if we're really thinking in terms of, both sides, both of those communities not wanting to immediately dismiss the other community, but just not understanding them, right? And not having any real background in what is driving those communities to act in the way they are and do the things that they do. And, a lot of it is just about folks coming together and being exposed to different perspectives. I'm seeing that now in the work that I'm doing with labor. You talk about fossil fuel companies not being solely responsible because we all use those things. It's the same thing with workers for the fossil fuel industry. They didn't sign up for that industry to destroy the planet, but they're now stuck in a situation where they've got to help be part of the solution. And so you need to bring those folks along and try to find ways that they can participate in the solution without being cast as enemies. So.
And I agree with that. And that's when I talk cross-laminated timber versus steel and concrete. I'm still looking at the crane operators that lifted the steel and, the concrete to make those rides, that they can do that same job under that other industry, and we transition. I think that transition of industry and workers is so important that we look at all that. I truly believe in that.
There was a comment in the film from Nils Kristofferson, who's the executive director of Wallowa Resources, and he was citing a study that he had done where 80% of folks in Eastern Oregon believe that the climate is changing. Less than 50% acknowledge that it's human driven. But it's a wonderful piece of data, because it shows that the vast majority of people in rural Eastern Oregon acknowledge that things are shifting and changing, and we need to be doing things to become more resilient and adapt to these changes. And so even now, when we were up with Nick in Lakeview recently covering the bootleg fire, there was an article, there was a ton of national coverage of the bootleg fire. And for a brief moment, the national lens was focused on Lakeview and that region. And there was an article that came out in the Washington Post that was really disparaging towards Eastern Oregonians, basically saying that, even in the face of this catastrophic climate change fueled wildfire, people in this place don't acknowledge that climate change is happening or climate change is part of this problem. And it was just so in contrast to what we know and what we have discovered through this film and through what Nick speaks to and what Jim speaks to. And frankly, most of the people and folks who we have interacted with in Eastern Oregon. And so I think there's still a lot of work that we all have to do to kind of just kind of squash that narrative. It's kind of a dated narrative now. It doesn't really apply anymore. And so again, and go back to the IPCC report and this need to kind of come together immediately. We can, there's so much room for us to do this and to come to the table together. So I just wanted to bring that quote up because I really, I just thought it was a great piece of data from Nils.
So I think that's actually a fantastic note to end on. It sort of goes back and summarizes why folks need to see this documentary and hopefully the next one, and start to really break down barriers between communities, between segments of our communities. We can't afford to place blame on folks. We can't afford to fight with each other. There's a lot of work ahead. And the best way we do that is working collaboratively together. So really appreciate the spirit of this film. Marion, you have something that you wanted to share before we sign off here.
I do, and I'll need Meryl's assistance to do this, but we want to thank our participants so much for taking your time on a Saturday morning. I know you all have a lot going on. And it's kind of funny because we just got done talking about planting trees, but we have as a group bought you each a tree in your honor that will be planted in an area that has been burned out by the wildfires. So again, thank you so much. And you'll be each getting a tree certificate, and you can actually go online and find your particular tree, find out where it's been planted and how it's doing. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you
Really
very
thoughtful.
thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah, so in closing, Jim, Nick, James, we really appreciate you coming out and spending the time. We will have this recording up, and when the next film comes out, you please let us know, because this will be a part of that discussion too, I think, and it's relevant. We want to keep folks thinking the ways that you are, which is, let's come up with solutions. Let's find ways in all pockets of this country to move forward. So appreciate all the efforts that you guys are making. It's fantastic, and we can all learn from what you have to share with us.
Yes,
Thank you
thank
all.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
All right, you guys have a good
Well
day.
done. Thank you so much.
I'm going to keep the meeting open for one more moment so that if you're interested, go ahead and click the three dots in the chat and you can download the chat file. And again, keep in mind that we are recording this, and in the chat, there's a link to our YouTube channel as well. Thank you guys so much. Great discussion.
Thank
you, everyone.
Take care.
Three, two.